great scouts. You can smell them from 50 yards away. So here we are. And just think, the captain wanted me to stay and set up camp.
Alarm bells begin to chime almost immediately as we're introduced to the horribly generic plot by way of a narrated cutscene. The story and setting borrow heavily from The Witcher, Dragon Age and A Song of Ice and Fire. An army of dead walkers are sweeping the nation, led by a group of ice lords intent on enslaving the races of man and elf. Your protagonist, nicknamed Vulcan, no matter what name you pick for him or her, is a powder master in the employ of a company of elite mercenaries called the Freeborn Blades. While repelling a Deadwalker onslaught, Vulcan is caught up in the fallout of a magical rite performed by the Red Scribes, a sect of shadowy monks whose goal is footing the Freeborn Blades' current contract. As a result, Vulcan finds himself sharing the body with a demonic presence that imbues him with the power to summon and manipulate fire. With his newfound power, Vulcan soon finds himself, or herself, embroiled in a greater conflict, attracting the undesirable attention of the Ice Lords and their undead minions. And if that sounds trite, that's because it is. Sadly, this offers nothing we haven't seen before in terms of story. The fantasy setting is as derivative as they come, and the mishmash of accents doesn't help the average voice acting, nor does the slang and gratuitous swearing, which clash with everything else going on around you. Similarly to Of Orcs and Men, Bound by Flame seems to be struggling to find its own identity. And claims that the story would last 30 hours are simply untrue. Without rushing, though without chasing down every side quest, I was done in 10 hours and 5 minutes. Just as the story was beginning to reach its stride, I ended abruptly and unsatisfyingly, and it left me wondering if I had done something to accidentally bypass a massive chunk of it. It is, thankfully, immediately replayable due to the morality weaved throughout the narrative, and while the choices Vulcan has to make are fairly black and white, the upshot is that making evil decisions, usually any time you take the advice offered by your demonic parasite, mutates the protagonist eventually quite extremely. The problem is that there's little sense of impact in your decisions, even at the finale. No matter what you choose, the ending is over in a few minutes and you're left wondering what the hell you bothered for. It's not helped by the fact that the supporting cast carry absolutely no emotional weight. You meet and recruit each one of them with almost zero pomp and circumstance within the first 5 to 6 hours, drafting them into your story like a wet pebble collecting sand. Then, quite suddenly, you're forced to side with one of them, and the loser abandons you. It feels completely arbitrary. Dragon Age Origins this isn't, even with the saucy romance scenes that have all the erotic appeal of an episode of Thunderbirds. With very few game areas to traverse in a playthrough, there is hardly any time to explore romantic interests, really, unless you carry out every side quest, which are easy to bypass when a single decision catalyses the next story advancement unexpectedly. Also, no matter what you do, the story does as it pleases. An early quest asks you to save an elven royal with a specially brewed concoction. If you miss the ingredients you need, he wakes up healed, and offers the flimsiest explanation for his recovery. It's lazy, rushed writing at its worst. You'll find yourself skipping through vast swathes of the dialogue and then discovering shortly after that you missed nothing. Events simply have no emotional fallout. Combat, while enjoyable, is fairly hit and miss throughout. It's based around 3 skill tenets: warrior, ranger and pyromancy. The first stance is Vulcan brandishing a two-handed weapon and is unsurprisingly all about hitting hard and absorbing damage by blocking. You can kick through an enemy's shield, deliver powerful roundhouse blows, or knock an opponent to the ground. It's more or less Vulcan's default stance. Ranger stance employs twin daggers, and while the damage dealt is more or less the same, you attack much faster and aren't able to block attacks without staggering. In this stance you can also enter stealth mode for high damage back attacks. Finally, there's pyromancy, which awakens a demon within and launches fireballs or wreathes Vulcan's weapon in flames. There are only 4 fire spells available for the whole game, all of which are unlocked from the beginning, and progression only comes from mutating the spells. It remains basic though, increasing the number of fireballs or a spell's duration rather than offering you anything new. In fact, all 3 skill trees are underwhelming, filled with tri-level talents that do little but increase percentages. An extra 10% chance to score a critical hit sounds great, but in practice you'll barely notice a difference from level to level. Of course, it's not easy to effectively track your own progression when the difficulty is so ridiculously pendulous. One moment you'll be carving through the enemy like hot pea through snow, and the next you're forced to face a new type of enemy that seems almost insurmountable. 4 times I had to lower the difficulty level to progress, and I was only playing on normal to begin with. The issue is that Vulcan's attacks lack weight, and enemies can cut straight through your combos. Blocking on time will counterattack, but it seems that the enemy health bars fall incredibly slowly, each blow knocking a tiny sliver off each time. By contrast, 3 or 4 good hits and Vulcan is usually down. When the hyperactive lock-on drags you around the battlefield like you're on a broken fairground waltzer, you'll find yourself taking hits from all angles and it's easy to become overwhelmed. That said, there is a rhythm to the combat that you will see sooner or later, but constantly blocking and counter-attacking means every big fight lasts an age. The most interesting element is the underused crafting system. Bound by Flame allows you to gather ingredients from the environment or the dead like raw metal, bones and leather, which can then be combined to create rarer ingredients. These can then be applied to most weapons and armour. A breastplate on its own looks fine, but add some shoulder pads and tassets and it starts to look more like a suit of armour. Visually, there's very little in Bound by Flame to trouble the PlayStation 4. Even last-gen consoles will find nothing strenuous in the admittedly atmospheric aesthetics. Lighting and shadows are above average thanks to the decent silk engine, yet things like the character animation and lip syncing are all over the place. Spiders have delivered an action RPG that just about manages to remain playable throughout, but offers no single wow moment. An interesting but limited crafting system and an atmospheric fantasy world don't make up for the run-of-the-mill writing, two-dimensional characters, imbalanced combat and a rushed, unsatisfying narrative. Like Orcs of Men before it, Bound by Flame is an uneven mishmash of decent new ideas and painfully generic genre tropes that struggle to gel, yet somehow it blunders through to deliver a mostly enjoyable experience. Bound by Flame had a great deal of potential, but it feels half realised, and this is simply not the epic adventure we were promised.
Anyhow, you have to fight fire with fire, so they say.